Hey, what's up, everybody? This is take two. I got a call from my mom, and I don't know. It's like my phone did some weird stuff, and I had to remake this. So, all right, it's gonna be a 35-minute video. So if you don't like book reviews, you can get off my lawn. All right. So get ready. The following will be a chapter-by-chapter review of the book called Death of the Liberal Class by Chris Hedges, which was recommended to me by Emily, Just Another Titty Sphinx Elizabeth, aka Starbuck. I see my poem to her. And she recommended it along with another book I'll go over in another review. She recommended it right before I randomly stopped talking to her. Then she deleted her channel, so whatever. The epilogue reads, and this will be important to remember throughout, alright, because I'm going to be jumping back and forth from my own personal opinion to the author's words to quotes within the book, alright, so just fill in the blanks. You got this. Seamless transitions, alright. So the epilogue reads, at any given moment, there is an orthodoxy, a body of ideas which it is assumed that all right-thinking people will accept without question. It is not exactly forbidden to say this, that, or the other, but it is not done. To say it, just as in mid-Victorian times, it was not done. To mention trousers in the presence of a lady. Anyone who challenges the prevailing orthodoxy finds himself silenced with surprising effectiveness. A genuinely unfashionable opinion is almost never given a fair hearing, either in the popular press or in the highbrow periodicals. That was a quote from George Orwell's Animal Farm. I'm sure some of you recognized it. Okay, so like I said, remember that. Status quo is the way to go, unless it's not, and then in which case you're going to be criticized. And that's where I come in. Alright, like I said, chapter by chapter, we're going through there. Chapter 1, Resistance. John Gray says, classical liberalism has four principal features, or perspectives, which give it recognizable identity. It is individualist. It asserts that moral primacy is the personal, it asserts the moral primacy of the person against any collectivity. Egalitarian in that it confers all human beings the same basic moral status. I'm going to stop there. Egalitarianism is often conflated, like democracy is conflated with representation, even though republicanism, which Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution guarantees a republican government, republicanism strictly entails, now in the definition, representation. So and Plato hated democracy for a good reason. It's nothing but mob rule. So when people say, oh, democracy and republicanism is the same thing, no, it's not. That only happened in modern times when they decided to pervert the meaning of words so everything means everything and we can all be vagina together. No, alright? So when he says egalitarian, he specifically says that human beings have the same basic moral status. That's what the Bible means also when it says, well, that's what complementarians hold, that God made man, male and female made he them. We're spiritually equal, and have the same moral status thereby. But egalitarianism itself also entails equality before the law, equality of opportunity. Those are good, along with moral and spiritual equality. Alright? Those are all good. But egalitarianism also entails equality of outcome, which the Bible clearly says that we're not to be surety for a stranger, because he who is surety for a stranger will smart for it, and he who hates surety is sure. So the thing is the Bible doesn't like socialism and communism either. It's Robin Hood, it's theft. Okay? And so when he says egalitarian, he is wrong in the current. See, John Gray said this a long time ago. These days, he wouldn't say egalitarian. He would say equitable in that it confers all human beings. But then again, classical liberalism is out the door, just like classical music, more or less. But anyway, I'm gonna continue. Just remember that I said that. Okay, he says that they have the same basic moral status, universalist. And again, he's using it in an unqualified way. Unqualified universalism, again, in modern sense, is bad because it's like, men and women have no differences. Wrong. But in his classical meaning, it means, or in classical sense, it means affirming the moral unity of the species, which is redundant to the last thing he said, but it's still true. And meritorious, in that, if I said that right, in that it asserts the open-ended improvability by use of critical reason of the human life. Now, I would say to a relative degree that I would agree with that. We are able to improve. Now, I believe there's a cap, but maybe there isn't. So I'll go ahead and go with that. Oh, man, over here dropping stuff. Okay, so let's see, where am I at? La la la. Okay, so yeah, okay, and then World War I, says the book, shattered liberal optimism about the inevitability of human progress. That's what he says, but people say lots of things. And consolidated state and corporate control over economic, political, cultural, and social affairs. I would say that was done before then, in the form of women getting the vote without registering for selective service. Okay. All right, as soon as women got the vote in Germany, they voted in Adolf Hitler, so whatever. If that's when you noticed it, good on you, Mr. Hedges. He says it created mass propaganda to cow citizens and silence independent and radical voices within the liberal class. Okay, from what he's describing as a liberal class, that's me, a Republican, a conservative Republican. Okay, so who speaks out against these things, even though they're hushed and bullied. Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, socialist nonsense, by the way, was put in place only when the capitalist system collapsed, because he's a socialist, was the final political gap of classical liberalism, which pretty much is conservative republicanism, from what I can see, in the United States. The New Deal reforms, however, were systematically dismantled, arguably, in the years after World War II, often with the assistance of the liberal class. I would say new stuff has taken its place. Chapter 2, that was Chapter 1, making it hot. Chapter 2, Permanent War. Permanent war is the most effective mechanism used by political elites to stifle reform and muzzle dissent. The state of war demands great secrecy, constant vigilance, and suspicion. It generates distrust and fear, especially in culture and art, often reducing it to silence or nationalist cant. It degrades and corrupts education and the media. See all our female teachers and girl power segments on television, for instance. That's narrow, but it still counts. It wrecks the economy. Agreed. Socialism. It nullifies political opinion or public opinion. Agreed. Let's see. And it forces liberal institutions. See, when he says liberal, never mind. This guy's no touch. If you listen to his talks, he's a low testosterone. Lets his wife take control. He's fat. He's weak. To him, he's still got this, heroes rebellion in his mind. It's nonsense, but whatever. From days gone by, 100 and something years ago. But he says it forces liberal institutions, even conservative institutions, to sacrifice their beliefs for a holy crusade, a kind of surrogate religion where it is against meaning classical liberalism, is against the Hun, the Bolshevik, the fascist, the communist, and the Islamic terrorists. The liberal class in a state of permanent war, is rendered impotent. I would agree, but I would also say the present liberal class is the Hun, the Bolshevik, the fascist, the communist, and the Islamic terrorists. They're all grouped together. But whatever. according to him, like I said, his classical liberal is my conservative Republican, but whatever. Inverted totalitarianism differs from classical forms of totalitarianism, which revolve around a demagogue or charismatic leader. It finds its expression in the anonymity of the corporate state. The corporate forces behind introverted totalitarianism do not, as classical totalitarian movements do, replace decaying structures with new, revolutionary structures. They do not import new symbols and iconography. They do not offer a radical alternative. Corporate power purports, in inverted totalitarianism, to hold electoral politics, freedom, and the Constitution, or rather to honor, not to hold, to honor electoral politics, freedom, and the Constitution. But these corporate forces so corrupt and manipulate power as to make democracy impossible. Now, if you saw my alt MGTOW request video, you know that there's only like a 10% chance of the people passing a law and like a 90% chance of corporations passing laws. So, and in our 100 years worth of socialist female voting majority, when only men register for selective service and only Caucasian men don't receive affirmative action, that is no surprise. So even that 10% is utterly lost to feminine proclivities. But this guy is correct in that we are now in, and that wouldn't be, the corporate issue wouldn't be such a problem if, like I said, women weren't just totally inept in stifling government corruption, okay? They've been getting a lead on us men for 100 years. We can do nothing. Okay, besides fight back as best we can, which ain't much. All right, it's not much. But he says corporate people basically are telling us what we want to hear and then not doing it. I agree. See the American Anti-Corruption Act. I'll get into that in a minute. As well as the stuff that I say about our female voting majorities and the fact that only about 10% chance of passing it. Go see my alt MGTOW request video. It lines that stuff out. Chapter 3. Dismantling the liberal class. The rise of mass propaganda signaled the primacy of Freud, who discovered before I start, the Bible called this stuff out there, a long time ago. You know, Jesus saying people draw near to him with their heart or with their words, but are far from him with their heart. Solomon goes all through it in Proverbs, so on and so forth. But hey, what can I say? Chapter 3, Dismantling the Liberal Class. The rise of mass propaganda signaled the primacy of Freud, who discovered the manipulation of powerful myths and images playing to the subconscious fears and desires could lead men and women to embrace their own subjugation and even self-destruction. What Freud and the great investigators of mass psychology realized was that the emotions were not subordinate to reason. As I said, this has been called out in the past. If anything, it was the reverse. Prior to World War I, much current American thinking followed post-Enlightenment European thought. Relied on the assumption that reason could rule. That debate in the public sphere was driven most powerfully, and this is subjective on a conjecture on his part, because one could say it was not viewed that way and be equally correct. So that debate in the public sphere was driven most powerfully, again, not necessarily, and effectively by strong rational underpinnings. Now, he could have said powerfully and that would have been fine, but picking an order made it wrong. The dream was of a pure dialectic, says who? Embodied in data, facts, postulates, deductions, or induction, stripped of emotion and conditioning. What Freud and the mass psychologists, and in turn their godchildren, the mass propagandists, had rediscovered, was a deep psychological truth grasped first and perhaps best, not first, or even best, I would say, by the philosophers and rhetoricians of classical Greece. The Old Testament has plenty of it. Greek philosophers did celebrate, among others, celebrate reason as a reflection of divine truth enacted in the human mind. But the Greek philosophers were trained in rhetoric before dialectics. And logical argumentation had to have a rhetorical emotional resonance if it were to sway and shape public opinion. In the Pinks, I think it's called, of Athens, and later in the Forum of Rome, rhetors exercised powers of persuasion that appealed to emotions alongside the appeal to reason and facts. Many classical philosophers, beginning with Plato, like I said, there's stuff that predates them, warned that the appeal to emotion was only as good as the man making the appeal. But in 20th century mass propaganda, this warning was cast aside. The idea was to sway and to use any means to do it. The moral aspect of public persuasion was pushed aside in pursuit of targeting arousal of mass emotions. As the Greeks already knew, and many before them and after them, and Freud and his followers rediscovered, the illusion of pure dialectic was just that, an illusion. 12,000 people, roused by German attacks on the American cargo vessels and fiery denunciations in the press, rallied on March 22nd of 1917 in Madison Square Garden to call for war at a mass meeting organized by the American Rights Committee. William English Walling, Charles Edward Russell, Upton Sinclair, and nearly all of the other intellectual leaders in the Socialist Party, okay, be aware of that, abandoning their opposition, issued a call for war the next day. Now, he's not going to say that current liberals are socialists, but he sure is dancing around it. And he is himself. If you go talk to Chris, you'll find out, Mr. Hedges, from his talks, he's a straight up socialist, feminist wuss. But he ain't gonna say that. He's gonna act like, we was Republicans, basically. All right. Okay, so they basically was like, yeah, we got to have some war, even though we're against it. And then he says classical liberalism, while it embraced the goals of the Enlightenment, was colored by a healthy dose of skepticism about human perfectibility and acutely aware of the nature and potency of evil, as they should be, as we all should be. Modern liberalism, see, he jumped from classical to modern. Okay, so classical liberalism's cool, but modern liberalism, no. Modern liberalism lost this awareness. Human institutions and government were seen as mechanisms that, under the right control, would inevitably better mankind. My alarm was going off there. Make sure. Okay, I'm still filming. Funny. Okay, so that was it. They would invariably better mankind, but I don't agree with that, because obviously they're not. Okay. Chapter 4, Politics as Spectacle. You all know about this. Marxists now become culture and literary critics. Cultural and literary critics. These theorists invested their energy in multiculturalism, with branches such as feminist studies, queer studies, and African American studies. Now, this guy's a feminist, and he's saying, Marxist. But he's not a Marxist. So you'll catch the double think, shall we say. Classic woman logic. The inclusion of voices often left out of the traditional academic canon certainly enriched the university. See our 90% female teachers and tanking grades amongst children. Unless they're women, and it's artificial markup. But multiculturalism, rather than leading to a critique of structures and systems that consciously excluded and impoverished the poor and the marginal, became an end in itself. See critical theory. The book says, my anger is not directed against these institutions so much as those within them, I would say big mistake, that failed when we needed their voices. These liberal principles were egregiously betrayed to protect careers, to preserve access to the powerful. I agree. Liberals conceded too much to the power elite. The tragedy of the liberal class and the institutions it controls. Notice he didn't say control, See, it's bleeding between classical and modern. The line is not there anymore, buddy. You're a relic. So, of time's going by. The institution it controls is that it succumbed to opportunism and finally to fear. I agree. It abrogated its moral role. Boom. Okay, fair enough. It did not defy corporate abuse when it had the chance. It exiled those within its ranks who did, meaning him. More conservative liberals, let's call them. And the defanging of the liberal class not only removed all barriers to neo-feudalism and corporate abuse, but also ensured that the liberal class will, in its turn, be swept aside. Was before you were born, but okay. Chapter 5, Liberal Defectors. Karl Popper says, but the secret of the intellectual excellence is the spirit of criticism. It is the intellectual independence. Or it is intellectual independence. I agree, Mr. Popper there. And this leads to difficulties which must prove insurmountable for any kind of authoritarianism. The authoritarian will, in general, select those who obey, who believe, who respond to his influence. But in doing so, he is bound to select mediocrites. Nice, that's a nice word, mediocrites. Because I thought I read something else, but no. For he excludes those who revolt, who doubt, who dare to resist his influence. Never can an authority admit that the intellectually courageous, i.e. those who dare to defy his authority, may be the most valuable type. Of course, the authorities will always remain convinced of their ability to detect initiative. But what they mean by this is only a quick grasp of their intentions, and they will remain forever incapable of seeing the difference. I agree. The failure by the liberal class to adjust to the harsh new realities of corporate power and the permanent war economy, to acknowledge its own powerlessness, has left the liberal class isolated and despised. I agree. See, Democrats. A confused culture disdains the empathy and compassion espoused by traditional liberalism, also by republicanism, you see. This cruelty runs like welfare. It does nothing but damage. This cruelty runs like an electric current through reality television and trash talk programs, where contestants endure pain and humiliation while they betray and manipulate those around them in a ruthless world of competition. Friendship, trust, solidarity, honesty, and compassion are all banished from the unadulterated world of competition. I agree, but okay, I'll just leave it at that. I agree. But it's important to remember that it's unadulterated, because one should not simply compete for its own sake. This is where it goes into stuff I don't agree with. This hypermasculinity. If you look up hypermasculinity, not only is there no hyperfemininity, nor yet toxic femininity, but if you look up hypermasculinity, it's basically how women see men. Nothing more, nothing less. It's like a cartoon, a bad cartoon. This hypermasculinity, and he's saying this meaning our government's hypermasculinity, even though we're living in a straight up matriarchy that's existing in the shell of a former patriarchy, which actually cared about the people. It's a matriarchy that doesn't care. See women divorcing men and them committing suicide. Alright, this hypermasculinity, says our resident chunky monkey of a liberal Democrat. Well, he's Canadian, but same difference. See Justin Trudeau, Mangine of the Year, however many years running. This hypermasculinity, the core of pornography, fuses violence and eroticism, as well as the physical and emotional degradation of women. Ooh, We're so evil, aren't we? It is the language employed, and it's a cartoon. No, men don't really act like that unless they were raised by women. Single mothers. Look at prisons. 85% or so are raised by single mothers. It is the language, and they act just like this. Hypermasculine. Which isn't hypermasculine. It's actually feminine in its own way. Because it's weak. And it has no substance. It's a character. It is the language employed by the corporate state, arguably, because if you go in and start talking about sex and violence, you'll be amended, you'll be thrown out or harangued immediately. So it's actually the opposite of the truth. Human beings are reduced to commodities. That's true. A military culture attacks what non-military cultures do too. Attacks all that is culturally defined as feminine. Okay, in this case, masculine. Like I said, he's just throwing out words because they don't attack the feminine, they attack the masculine. So, and if we are in a militarized culture and they do attack the masculine, then what he's saying is wrong. Unless we're not in a militarized culture, we're in a feminine, peaceable culture. See, there is no culture like that. It's nonsense. Including, they attack everything feminine, which love isn't feminine, neither is gentleness. Men are more compassionate. So this is all just a bunch of nonsense, including love, gentleness, compassion, and acceptance of difference. It sees any sexual ambiguity as a threat to maleness, male hardness. See masculinity so fragile as thought of by women, not men. And the clearly defined roles required by the militarized state. Again, he's yet to prove that. The elevation of military values as the highest standard sustains the perverted ethic, rigid social roles, and emotional numbness. Okay, well, it hasn't been proven that it is elevated to the highest standard. I don't believe it is. Military standards, that is. It is moral cancer that the liberal class once struggled against. And once the remnants of the liberal class adopt the heartless language of sexual violence, again, he's strawman and men so bad right here, they assent, consciously or not, to the rule of corporate greed and violence. Okay, what are there besides violence that, see, it's nonsense. He equates violence and masculinity. Women are more violent than men. I'll go over that in a lot of ways. Ralph Nader says the problem is that most liberals are estranged from the working class. Boom. See Pretty Princesses. They largely have the good jobs. They are not hurting. They have affirmative action. And they don't have to go to war. Our destitute working class now understands that the cloying, feel your pain language of the liberal class is a lie. The liberal, notice how he calls liberal class, he goes from classic to modern almost seamlessly. He's not wrong. The liberal class is not attempting to prevent wages from sinking, unemployment from mounting, foreclosures from ripping apart communities, or jobs from being exported. The grasp between stark reality and the happy illusions peddled by smarmy television news personalities, fatuous, I'm not sure what that word is. Fat, okay, academic and financial experts, oily bureaucrats and politicians is becoming too wide to ignore. And he's a bigot himself, and he's got this same fluffy mindset, but he's not quite as bad as them. So, he's better, I guess. Right? Is becoming too wide to ignore. And those cast aside are often willing to listen to anyone, no matter how buffoonish or ignorant, who promise that the parasites and courtiers who serve the corporate state will disappear. See, God Emperor Trump normie queers who think everything will be fine if we just keep letting women vote and keep doing what we've been doing. Churchian normie queers as well. They won't follow the Bible. See Titus 2:5 or 1 Timothy 5:8 or Genesis 3:16 through 19. They won't follow the Bible, but we got to keep on Bibling it up. So, okay, and same thing in the government. Okay, so he says that they're basically idiots, and they are. Trump's the God Emperor. We got to meme our way out of this one. And he ain't doing nothing. So, right-wing rage, says the book, is becoming synonymous with right-wing populism. You're darn straight. All right. So, chapter 6, Rebellion. All resistance must recognize that the corporate coup d'etat is complete. We must not waste our energy trying to reform or appeal to systems of power. This does not mean the end to resistance, but it does mean very different forms of resistance. American society, although it continues to use these traditional and sentimental iconography and language to describe itself, has in fact become so radically transformed by liberal gullibility and unchecked corporatism that it bears no resemblance to its self-image. Corporate forces, whether in Copenhagen or the U.S. Congress, ignore the needs of and desires of the citizens. See my stuff about 10% chance of people passing a law, 90% chance of corporations, or the American Anti-Corruption Act. Corporate interests have seized all mechanisms of power, from government to mass propaganda. They will not be defeated through elections or influenced through popular movements. The ideology of globalization, like all inevitable utopian visions, has imploded. The power elite, perplexed and confused, cling to the utopian dreams and outdated language of globalization to mask political and economic vacuum. Pindar says, "O my soul, do not aspire to mortal life, but to exhaust the limits of the possible." I like that. Cicero was despised by the crowd, and as he was by the power elites. When his severed head and hands were mounted on the podium in the Colosseum, and his executioner Mark Antony announced that Cicero would speak and write no more, the tens and thousands of spectators roared their approval. Tyranny in an age of chaos is often greeted with palpable relief. There often is no public outcry. The rebel must, for this reason, also expect to become the enemy, even of those he or she is attempting to protect. The indifference to the plight of others and the cult of the self is what the corporate state seeks to instill in us. This state appeals to pleasure as well as fear to crush compassion. Mr. Hedges identifies as a Christian anarchist, and I think that's kind of cool, but we are in a constitutional republic and not a democracy, so he got that wrong. Okay, be sure and check out the American Anti-Corruption Act. I'll leave a link to it. All right, so yeah, okay, so that's about it for this video. I do want to say that classical liberalism, or the so-called death of the liberal class, to Mr. Hedges, occurred the very day that women took charge, you soy boy. This is your host, the apex of predators, and I don't always not bow to no man, but when I do, I don't.